When we come back, a very special guest going to be joining us. We'll talk to an attorney that tangled with the legal system, tangled with judges representing 2,000 Katrina victims, and wound up at the end getting disbarred, and someone who's really made some interesting news since Katrina. Prior to that, he had a sterling legal career. And now he's had a life turned upside down by all of this. And we're going to examine what he's been doing and how he's continuing the fight. That's Ashton R, who's going to be joining us next. So keep it right here on Ringside on WGSO 990 AM and WGSO.com. I thought it'd be appropriate today, we're the 12th anniversary of Katrina, to talk to someone whose life was really turned upside down by Katrina. Prior to Katrina, he was a partner with Lemley Kelleher. He had been a lawyer for over 35 years. He was living with a lot of the elite in the Uptown area on St. Charles Avenue, one of the premier streets in the country. Certainly had a great reputation in the legal community. And because of what happened in the aftermath, he really lost everything. And his partnership, his marriage, his finances. And he's going to tell us today what he had to endure. And we'll have him back on for more in-depth discussion, but wanted to at least start the conversation with him today and talk about his representation of 2,000 Katrina clients and what happened in that case. Ashton O'Dwyer joining us here on the Ringside Hotline. And Ashton, good morning, sir. Welcome.
Good morning, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for joining us. And on the 12th anniversary of Katrina, really is a day probably has an impact on you, because this is really how things really changed in your life, right? Hurricane Katrina?
Definitely. It's very emotional.
Tell our listeners, if you could, your life prior to Katrina, a little bit about who you were prior to the hurricane.
Well, I actually lived a storybook life. Everything was terrific. I had a thriving law practice. I was an admiralty and maritime lawyer with a prestigious firm, and I loved getting up in the morning and going to work. That's about all I can say. It was great. Wonderful wife, wonderful children, wonderful life.
So Katrina hits, and tell us what you do for the storm. As the storm is preparing to bear down on New Orleans, you decide to stay?
I did. I knew that government was not going to be in a position to protect what was mine, and so I hunkered down and decided that I was going to do the job that the government could not do. And it was a very trying experience. It was like playing Army. I likened it to living a Lord of the Flies, Robinson Crusoe existence. But because I lived on the sliver by the river, I didn't suffer any flooding. The only damage my house had was insured roof damage, and there wasn't any leak into the living areas. So I had provisions there. I was high and dry, and, I just hunkered down for the duration.
So you stayed there. Were you one of the few in your area to stay, or were there lots of people that stayed?
There were a handful. I wouldn't say a lot. And that is kind of fuzzy, because at some point in time, they started allowing people day passes to come into the city. So I was visited by people who were there for the day only, but had to leave by curfew, which was at 6 p.m. So I can't say exactly how many stayed in my neighborhood just like I did. But whoever they were eventually made it to my house to get water, ice, gasoline, whatever. I was helping whoever I could.
Right. So you were there, you were doing all of this, you were hot and dry, people were coming by for help. When did you first interact with, quote, the government?
I first interacted with the government on September the 19th, 2005, which was a Monday. I had, by that point in time, severed my relationship with my law firm. That's another long story that we're not going to get into today. And I had written out in longhand a lawsuit against the United States of America, the state, Governor Blanco, Mayor Nagin, the city, and a bunch of others. And I drove to Baton Rouge that Monday and filed that lawsuit in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Louisiana, which was then sitting in Baton Rouge. The New Orleans clerk's office was shut down. That was my first real interaction with the government. Ashton O'Dwyer going on the offensive.
Okay, and you were representing 2,000 individuals, right?
Not at that point in time. I had about 50 people who had signed up for me to represent them. So the first round, if you will, was only about 50 people. That list grew into a 47-page, single-spaced, typewritten tome, which includes my 2,000 or so clients, most of whom, I might add, were black, most of whom didn't have much to begin with, but lost everything they had in Katrina and were looking to me for a recovery, okay?
How did they find you? How did all these people turn to you, Ashton O'Dwyer?
Because I lived on St. Charles Avenue, which was one of the main arteries in and out of New Orleans, I was interviewed on an almost daily basis by journalists from out of town who had videographers with them and who would see me out on the neutral ground or on my property or my neighbor's property cleaning up. And they would stop and interview me. They'd want to know, well, what are you doing here? Why haven't you left? If they had to go, why did you get to stay? I mean, it was that sort of thing. So people knew my name. I still had landline service at that point in time, believe it or not. Cell phone service was intermittent. But that's how people learned about Ashton O'Dwyer.
All right, we want to pick up the story when we come back. Ashton O'Dwyer is with us. Jeff Crouere here. It's Ringside on WGSO, 990 AM, WGSO.com. We'll also hopefully have time before we conclude today to squeeze in a call or two at 504-556-9696. But right now, let's get the latest news from Louisiana Radio Network. We'll be right back.
Call us now at 556-9696.
Fascinating discussion here with Ashton O'Dwyer, a man who, quote, lost everything, exposing the corruption that occurred after Hurricane Katrina, represented 2,000 Katrina clients eventually by the end. And we're talking about what happened to him previously living in this sliver by the river on beautiful St. Charles Avenue, and wound up really bankrupt and disbarred. And we want to talk about that. But I want to get back, Ashton, to what happened to these clients. Did any of these clients ever recover any damages?
No, Jeff. And I like to say that the purpose of litigation is winning. And if you look at the Katrina litigation, not only did people not win, but they got zero. How can you do worse than getting zero? Thank you, Mr. Joseph Bruno, Clarence Darrow Bruno, I call him. He was plaintiff's liaison counsel. How can you do worse than zero? The only, quote, recovery, close quote, to be made is this corrupt and fraudulent levee board settlement for one policy limit of approximately $20 million. Mark Schleifstein of the Times-Picayune back in April of 2017 wrote an article in which he put in black and white, some claimants are going to receive checks in the amount of $2.50. Boy, I wish I had one of those checks that I could hang on my wall. I mean, this is absurd, okay? You can't do worse than zero. Or if you want to give them credit for this corrupt and fraudulent levy board settlement, you can't do worse than $2.50. You want to hear about how that happened?
Please, tell us.
All right. For all of its complexity, I say that the victims of Katrina litigation was really a single issue case. It could be reduced to asking the following question. Does the United States of America have immunity or not? If the answer to that question is no, they don't have immunity, then the federal purse was wide enough, deep enough, and full enough to compensate everyone. I mean, we've been fighting in the Middle East for 16 years. Trillions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But if the United States of America had immunity, then who was the next deepest pocket?
The state.
Absolutely. I mean, that answer is obvious. Well, the federal judge in this case has a bunch of cronies that he surrounds himself with and still panders to this day, even though he's off the bench now, he retired. And these are rich and powerful people, okay? The Times-Picayune and Fox 8, Lee Zurich, did a series of presentations called Louisiana Purchase. And these are the types of people, including particularly a despicable character by the name of Calvin Fayard, who's number 7 on the list of influential people recognized by the Times-Picayune and Fox 8 News as being the movers and shakers here in the state. He's number 7. They decided that the big money to be made was not in representing victims of Katrina like me, but they were going to represent the state and presenting a claim for $200 billion on behalf of the state to the United States. Now, what was so despicable about this is, one, they didn't tell anybody about it until the second anniversary of Katrina. And two, they were appointed by the presiding judge, Stanwood R. Duval Jr., to represent the class in the Katrina litigation, which obligated them not to the state, but to all of the people who suffered, like my 2,000 clients. So these people had a clear conflict of interests for 2 years that they didn't disclose to anyone. They couldn't simultaneously represent the interests of the state in secret and represent the interests of the class. They should have been suing the state, but they didn't sue the state because they secretly represented the state.
So what did you, Ashton O'Dwyer, do after discovering this?
Well, on the second anniversary of Katrina, they had to file pleadings. That was a magical date under the Federal Tort Claims Act structure. And I saw their names on pleadings representing the state of Louisiana. I literally went ballistic. And it took me quite a while to figure it all out and to figure out who precisely was involved. But to make a long story short, I exposed this corruption, and for that, in retaliation and retribution, I have been severely punished.
So you filed you filed a legal malpractice class action lawsuit, right?
Yes, a pleading that I call the largest legal malpractice lawsuit in the annals of American jurisprudence. It's still there, believe it or not. It bears civil action number 08-4728 on the docket of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Louisiana. And it was filed on October 23, 2008. Exactly 2 weeks after I filed that lawsuit, on November 7, 2008, I was suspended from the practice of law summarily by a lazy, stupid, and corrupt federal judge by the name of Ivan L.R. Lamel, which in effect shut me down and shut down my lawsuit. Okay? I mean, once I was suspended from the practice of law and then later disbarred in federal court, I could no longer do anything to advance
represent your clients
of my clients. Correct. That is right.
And a few questions. We're visiting with Ashton R, Jeff Career here. It's Ringside WGSO. Under what grounds were you suspended from the practice of law?
All right. They didn't really need any grounds, okay? So they manufactured them. Remember, these are the people who make the rules, Jeff, okay? I have in front of me a 30-some-odd page disbarment order, which came down from what I call the bought and paid for Louisiana Supreme Court in March of this year. And it's just packed full of misrepresentations, outright lies, and fiction. It reads like a work of fiction. Usually, one associates a lawyer's disbarment with violating or ignoring to their detriment the rights of his clients or doing something dishonest like stealing client funds or misrepresenting things to the court, telling lies, in other words, which incidentally, Bruno himself has been suspended for a period of 1 year for having done in his past, okay? I never did anything like that. And they just made up stuff about me. And all of this is a matter of public record, both in the federal court system and before the bought and paid for Louisiana Supreme Court. I can give you one specific example of their dishonesty. One of the grounds for which I was disbarred was, quote, practicing law without a license after my suspension. The linchpin of that false argument was whether I signed a particular pleading, whether my signature appears on it. Well, at the time, I was represented by my cousin, Joseph W.P. Hecker, who is now deceased, who was a practicing lawyer and who was representing me. Billy, as we called him, signed the pleading, not me. We consulted about the case, and I gave him input into what should go in it, but it was his pleading signed by him when I argued orally before the bought and paid for Supreme Court in January of this year. I had signature pages from pleadings both signed by me and by my cousin, and I introduced those into evidence without objection, I might add, and yet the Supreme Court, in its dishonest opinion, wrote, and I'll quote here, just 1 second, if I can find it. O'Dwyer claims that he did not sign the pleading but he offers no evidence in support of his assertion. The direct quote is, he now states his cousin, acting as respondents, that's me, counsel, actually signed the pleading. However, he presents no evidence in support of his assertion, period, close quote. Page 18 and 19, a blatant lie and falsehood. So why was I disbarred? Because I was disbarred by a bunch of corrupt, conniving, dishonest scoundrels, both in federal court and in state court.
And have you appealed? Have you appealed that, Ashton, that disbarment?
I don't have a right of appeal from the state court disbarment, the Louisiana Supreme Court, the bought and paid for Supreme Court is the court of last resort. I did appeal the federal suspension and later disbarment, and that was thrown out on a technicality by the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. That's a story for another day. That is another unbelievable story.
Now, we have limited time, and I do want to ask you, we're visiting with Ashton R here, Jeff Career with you, Ringside on WGSO. Tell us about the existence of a secret agreement between the U.S. and the state, by the terms of which the U.S., through the Department of what you call injustice, agreed to assist the state in defeating the claims of innocent victims of Katrina.
Jeff, this is an unbelievable document. I only got a copy of it yesterday, believe it or not. I call it the most nefarious and reprehensible document to ever come out of the victims of Katrina litigation. I'm going to read you what the lawyer for the United States Department of Injustice, a scoundrel by the name of Robin Doyle Smith, stated on the record to Stanwood R. Duval Jr., who's as crooked as a snake. That was the presiding judge in the Katrina litigation. This is what Smith represented to the judge in open court on April 28, 2009, during the trial of the MRGO/Robinson case, the only Katrina case to be tried. Quote, the purpose of those joint defense agreements was to allow the defendants to share confidences and secrets and confidential information with other defendants so that we could benefit from each other's information and knowledge in preparing our own defenses in this case and in others. There were numerous strategy sessions that were held involving counsel for various defendants. That's at page 8 of 79, record document 18882, filed on May 22 of 09, but it was said in open court on April 28 of 09 in the Robinson Mystico case. Now, who were the parties to the agreement? Well, it was an agreement between the United States of America and, get this, just a moment, I'm flipping my pages here, the Orleans Levee Board, the New Orleans Surge and Water Board, the Board of Commissioners of the East Jefferson Levee District, the State of Louisiana through the Department of Transportation and Development, which was the body which served as the engineering arm of the Orleans Levee Board, the Parish of Jefferson, which is another story, and the Board of Commissioners of the Port of New Orleans. So what you had, Jeff, was the United States entering into a secret agreement with all of these state entities and including the state in order to, pardon my expression, screw, close quote, the innocent victims of Katrina, and to make sure that even if they couldn't recover against the United States, they wouldn't be able to recover against the state or its agencies and instrumentalities and political subdivisions either. This is reprehensible. This is like our own government entering into a contract with ISIS to kill American soldiers. It's
Ashton,
nefarious and reprehensible.
This is an amazing story. So many different components to it that we don't have time to get into today. We'll certainly explore this more, but I want to just share with listeners the point that you make here in this document that you give me. You say, lastly, the point should be made that notwithstanding the above and foregoing public corruption, not to mention the 1,500 deaths, the $200 billion in property damage, the untold anguish and misery caused by Katrina, Ashton O'Dwyer has been the only person punished. Not one employee of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, not one employee of the Board of Commissioners of the Orleans Levee District, not one employee of the Sewage and Water Board of New Orleans, not one employee of the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development, which served as the engineering arm of the Orleans Levee Board, has been punished. And with that, we have to roll. Ashton O'Dwyer, thank you for joining us. We'll explore this again on this 12th anniversary of a day that certainly changed your life and the lives of so many people here in the area. But Ashton went from St. Charles Avenue to bankrupt. And we certainly appreciate him sharing part of this story today. It's a very involved and complex story. James Gill has touched on a part of it in some of his columns. You can check out. He has been the only local journalist that has written about this extensively. But thank you, Ashton, for being with us. We'll come back and wrap it up next. It's Ringside right here on WGSO, 990 AM, WGSO.com. Our talk line 504-556-9696. Email address jeff@wgso.com. We'll be right back.